come from Germany will know it was similar to the bombing of Dresden in Germany. Rotterdam was bombed to pieces, and by some miracle, I don't believe it was God, by some miracle, our house was standing. The house to the right was gone. The house to the left was gone. The house behind us was gone. Our house was standing. God knows how come. And of course, when the bombing started, my father took us into the basement, and he put, I don't know what you call it, like sticky tape, because there wasn't shatterproof glass over the window, so they wouldn't, with the bombing, that the glass wouldn't come inside. And we all slept in the cellar. Anyway, we all had to take our case, and me being very small, I took a little case, and I remember I had a doll that I wanted to take with me, and I couldn't. I was very upset because you could only carry so much. So anyway, I couldn't take the doll. And we walked, and we walked, and we walked, and we walked. I don't know where we walked to, but we came to, in the night of course, we came to a big sort of I don't know what it was, and there were hundreds and hundreds of Jewish people there. And they were crying. There were men, women, children, everybody was, there was nowhere to sit. You sat on the floor or you lay on the floor. No food, no water, no nothing. And the whole night we spent there. Nobody told you where you were going. The next morning, they said, the next morning we went by bus to a place just on the Dutch-German border called Westerbork. Westerbork was a transit camp, which means that from there they were sent on to other lovely places. Lovely, I'm being inverted commas. People were sent to Treblinka, Sobibor, Auschwitz, you name it. In fact, most of my father's brothers landed up, you name a camp. We lost family there. We landed up in Westerbork. I didn't think it was so bad. I was a child. I had my mother with me, my father, my brother. What was I going to be miserable about? But I mean, when I think of it now, and I've seen pictures, look, I don't remember all the details, but anyway, there were barracks, big barracks, and all the men were on this side, and they had like sheets to divide the men and the boys, and then the women were on this side with sheets in between the women and the girls. And there was like a wooden table in between the bunks. They were 3-tiered bunks, but not like in the concentration camp in Germany. And you could get parcels. Now, my father still had brothers in Holland, and of course they sent us parcels. They didn't stop you getting parcels. You could get food. Nobody starved in Westerbork. It was not a concentration camp. It was a transit camp. And the one thing I will never forget, they had a list. Now, the commandant of Westerbork was a man called Chemiker. I don't know if he was Dutch or German. I think he was Dutch. Very prone, what was he, Dutch? Chemiker. And apparently the Germans told him that every Tuesday, I will never forget this ever, every Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock in the morning on the dot, a train came. Not a train like a train, a cattle truck. And 1,000 Jews had to get into that cattle truck. Now, cattle truck, there's no windows. People were locked in, wooden doors, and at the top there was a little place where you could breathe. People didn't know where they were going. But Chemiker, you could talk to him. I mean, after the war people, a lot of Dutch people thought he was a good guy. Look, there were no punishment blocks. Nobody got beaten, There was food, but it was a camp. And a lot of the people said to him, Commandant Chemiker, where are we going? Don't worry, he said, as long as you work hard, you'll be fine. And a train came every Tuesday, and it was marked Auschwitz, which is the Polish for Auschwitz. Nobody knew what Auschwitz was. How could anybody know? And people, now this was awful, people, it wasn't a train with compartments, people were literally pushed in to the camp. The Dutch Nazis and the German Nazis literally took people and pushed them, mothers, babies, pregnant women, older people, cripples. Now, what were these sort of people going to do in a work camp? And Chemeke was saying, if you work hard, you'll be fine. What are their children going to do in a camp? What are pregnant women going to do in a camp? He was talking nonsense, but he wanted to assure everybody. Now, the list was put on the wall of the barracks on a Monday, and there was always crying. I never knew what was going on. I heard people crying. You know, when you're so young, people don't tell you what's going on. I said to my mother, why are they crying? Well, maybe they're feeling sad. I didn't know then, but I saw 1,000 people, 1,000 people, every Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock were physically pushed into the cattle trucks. It was a one-way ticket to nowhere. Everybody promised to write. Did you get a letter? We never got a letter back. Nobody got letters. Anyway, that was called, what was that called? Well, I don't know what it was called. But anyway, every Tuesday, 1,000 people. And we knew our turn would come eventually. Although we were, oh yes, we were Hungarian because of my father. But then the Germans and Hungary used to be quite close up to a point. And then, because we were Jews, we weren't considered anything anymore. We were made stateless, which means you're not even worth like a piece of paper on the floor. It means that you've got no country, no one who can protect you. So we were now stateless. Well, one day our name came. Now, I was in Westerbork for 13 months. It was nearly 3 years altogether. 13 months. And as I say, I don't have bad memories. My mother was there, my father was there, and slowly, slowly my uncles from Holland all came. Everybody came to Westerbork because that was where to go. And there was Westerbork was built, I'm not sure of the facts, you may know, was built by the Dutch government for young German refugee boys. There were lots and lots of German refugee boys, young boys, 17, 18 years old. And I remember one, there weren't many little ones like us. And his name was Leo. He had a German name, I can't remember his name. And he sat us down. Now, it was built on the moor, it was damp, it was wet, it was cold. Where were you going to sit? So you sat in the mud, you had to sit somewhere. And he sat all us little ones down. Now, he spoke to us in German. Who could speak German? Not me. I only spoke Dutch. But somehow or other, he wanted to cheer us up. So what do you do with little kids? You tell them a story. He sat us down and he taught us songs. Now, I mean, I'm nearly 90. I'm very close to 90. I was little then. I haven't got a good memory now. But I have never, ever forgotten any of the songs that he taught us. He taught us Dutch songs, German songs, Hebrew songs, Yiddish songs. And for some reason, I remember every single one of those songs. And he told us about a wonderful place called Palestine. All I knew about Palestine was my mother and father used to play bridge, and my father didn't want the money to go to whoever won. We had a J&F box on the table, and the money went in towards the J&F box. And I didn't know what that was, but obviously the money was sent to Palestine, I don't know. And he said, you know, the skies are blue, and they've got palm trees, and it's warm and beautiful, and that's all we knew about Palestine. We didn't know much about Palestine. I didn't go to a Jewish school. I only went to nursery school. And, okay, he told us about that. And then one day, my father came. He was very upset. Our name was on the list to go on transport. It was called going on transport. But we were Hungarian stateless. Now, the Germans also got a bit mixed up. First of all, we were Jews. Now, I must say this, the Dutch Jews all had to wear a Star of David here and on their arm. The Hungarian Jews did not have to wear a star in Holland. You wore your ordinary clothes. Even in Westerbork, you weren't given a uniform or anything. And our name was on the list, and we didn't know where we were going. And I still remember it was the 3rd of February, we were taken away in the 16th of September 1942, we were taken away. And my arithmetic isn't so good, but anyway. What year was it then? At the end of 1943, the beginning of 44, we were still in Westerbork, and our name was on the list. And it was 2 days before my mother's birthday. My mother's birthday was February the 5th. And on the 3rd, I'm not sure if it was the 2nd or the 3rd of February, we had to leave Westerbork. And I remember my father and I found that was the last time I saw my father. I have never gotten over that. I was 7 years old. It's the last time I saw him. And I was a child. I didn't know I wouldn't see him again. And I said, Daddy, when he says, when I come back, I promise you we'll go skating. We'll go to the zoo. We'll go here. We'll go there. Because I went everywhere with my father. My mother was strict. My father was the softie. Anyway, I said goodbye, and then one thing he said which I thought was strange, he said, I don't know where you're going, but it's very important to keep clean. If you keep clean and you shower and wash every day, you're less likely to get sick. That's the last thing he said to me, and when I come back, he kept saying, when I come back, we'll go. Well, I'm still waiting, but he never came back. Anyway, that was that. So, and my father and 3 brothers went to Buchenwald. There were 9 brothers and 1 sister. Of the 9 brothers and 1 sister, only 3 survived the war. 1 was in Dachau, 1 was in Theresienstadt, and the 1 was from Buchenwald. The others gone. Now, my father was a twin, and he didn't look, well, as you call Irene. My father was very blonde and blue-eyed. I'm supposed to look like him, I don't know. I've got a son who's the image of him, but I had his colouring. And being, having grown up in Hungary, near Debrecen, which is not far from Budapest, he spoke a fluent German, and he didn't look Jewish. So he didn't look Jewish, and he spoke a fluent German. And I'm going backwards and forwards a bit, I'm sorry. But when he was in Holland and there was curfew, you couldn't go here, you couldn't go there, he decided he was going, he walked, I only heard this after the war, my mother told me. He took a chance, never mind the curfew, he didn't look Jewish, he didn't wear a star here or there, and he walked into town. And he went, Rotterdam is a big, big port, and near, I don't know where he walked to, but apparently there were big, big posters. You may have seen pictures. You'll know. That's Ewige Jude, the eternal Jew. And how did they picture a Jew? You can't believe. The thick lips and a big nose and eyes close to the head and a low forehead. I'm surprised that they didn't put horns and a tail. They looked terrible. And a big belly. And over the big belly, these were all posters all over Rotterdam, holding a big bag of money. That was the picture of a Jew. And he was very upset about this, of course. And he made a point of going, as I say, he didn't look Jewish, and he pulled off as many of these, whatever they were, posters from the trees and on the walls. And he had a little briefcase with him, and he put it in the briefcase. And eventually he burnt it, because if you were caught taking any of this German propaganda off, only one answer: they shot you. So he took a chance, but he felt that something he had to do. There was very little you could do to resist at that time. But he did do that. Okay, now we're in Westerbork. Now it's our town. I say goodbye to my father, not knowing it was the last time. And then we were going to a place called Ravensbrück. Now I must just give you the picture. Ravensbrück was the only women's camp in the whole of Germany. The only women's camp. It was the second largest camp after Auschwitz. The second large, and Auschwitz was bloody big. It was a massive, massive camp. There were people from 23 different countries, all European countries. Now, my mother told me long after the war, when she got to Westerbork, she said to me, you know, Irene, I thought it was hell. But when I got to Ravensbrück, I realized it was paradise. Nobody was prepared for Ravensbrück. Anyway, I said goodbye to my father and my uncles, and now it was time for us to go. We didn't go in a cattle truck because we were Hungarian, although we were Jews and stateless. They made a mix-up, I think. We went in an ordinary train. I couldn't believe it. We went in an ordinary train, in a carriage, and we drove, always at night. You never arrived anywhere in the day. And we arrived in Ravensbrück in, I don't remember the month, but it was 1944. 43, I don't know. We were, well, altogether, I was nearly 3 years in the camps. I think it was about 15 months in Ravensbrück. Anyway, we drove, we were in the train, and when we got out, it was dark, and all of a sudden we came to this place that I'll also never forget. The walls were 12 foot high, brick walls. There were sentries every few meters. There was electric wire, not the kind that would kill a pussycat. You touched that fence, you didn't live to see the next day. So there was this high fence, then there were the electric wires, and then there were sentries. And then, if that wasn't bad enough, there were searchlights going all around the camp. All around, which was awful. But you couldn't see where you were. And we were pushed into the camp, and it was dark. I'm trying to... February. It was February, which is bloody cold. Holland is cold. Germany's colder. Anyway, we got to Ravensbrück, and there were big barracks, wooden barracks. There were like 700 or 800 people in a barrack. Afterwards, there were more, because the bunks with, you must have seen pictures, 3-tiered bunks, terrible bunks, and you slept 4 people in a bunk. Here is your head, and here is my head this way, you know, so that everybody could fit in. You were given a straw mattress. They gave you a little metal dish and a spoon, no knife and fork. What were you going to cut? No, and a metal mug. And now people came in, and there were, in the barracks there were soldiers, German soldiers. I mean, this is all women. I mean, people were brought up nicely. You didn't get undressed in front of a man. And all these women, everybody had to get completely undressed. And a lot of people had, look, there were wealthy people in Holland. They had put diamonds and things in the hem of their clothes. But then the Germans weren't stupid. And they took all your clothes away, so you were naked. And then you walked around, and this I remember. I mean, I was only a child, so they didn't bother to tell me to get undressed. What was I going to hide? And my mother, she didn't wear diamonds. She wasn't, you know, but she had a plain gold wedding ring. And the Germans had a table with a big, like a bowl. And everyone had to take off their wedding ring. Now, you know, for a married person, to have to take off your ring, and you threw it into this thing. And your clothes were left behind, and then they threw the uniform at you. And I remember, well, to this day, I will not wear grey with navy blue. I won't wear stripes. You can kill me, I won't wear it. And the women were given a cotton dress, cotton, and a little cotton jacket, and a little doek to put over their head. Now, they checked your hair. A lot of pictures you see of people with shaven heads, because they checked if you had lice, they shaved all your head. But when we were in Westerbork, my mother was a very clean person, and I had thick, curly, blonde hair. And she made sure, morning and evening, she checked my hair that I had no lice. So my mother and I were one of the few who did not have our heads shaven, which was a big thing. Anyway, now, when they saw me with all my little clothes on, they said, oh, you know, let her be. Well, what was they going to be? So I had my jacket and my jersey and my woolly hat, which I wore. I wore the same clothes for 3 years. Now, when you're a child, you need shoes every few months. I've never had good feet since then, but never mind. Could be worse. So now we go out of the barrack, women with their with these clothes on, and we go into another barrack. You were processed, of course, they wrote your name down, and we were given, oh yes, they had a Magen David, a Star of David that they wore on their chest, and one on your arm. I'm not sure if you had it on your back. I don't remember. And on that Star of David, it was an ordinary, you know, a yellow Magen David. In the middle of it, there was the letter U, which stands for Ungar. Ungar is German for Hungarian. Ungar. And of course, it was a Magen David, which said Juda, which is Jew. So they knew you were Hungarian, and they knew you were a Jew. That's all they wanted to know. I don't remember. We were not given numbers. We were not tattooed like in Auschwitz. We were not. I don't remember having a number, but I think some of the women had a number on their arm tags. But as a child, I don't remember. There's a lot of things I don't remember. You know, you remember what you can. And then we go into the barrack, and that was something. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women, and the smell, God forbid any of you should ever smell that. Now, I was a little child. All I can say was it was the smell, well, it was feces, it was urine, and above all, it was the smell of death. It was the smell of death. And people were crying, and people were screaming. And suddenly, I'm holding on to my mother's hand for dear life. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand a word of German. I learned very quickly, because German and Dutch are not that different. I never spoke a word of English, but my mother, because her parents were religious and only spoke Yiddish, Yiddish and German are not so different. So my mother could understand the German, which helped. I don't know if it helped her, but anyway, she did. And as we walked past, I saw these 3-tiered bunks, these wooden beds. And the people, maybe they hadn't seen children, but they all wanted to touch me, because I had blonde, curly hair. And they kept, you know, they were filthy, they were dirty, they smelt of body odor, and God knows what else. They all wanted to touch me. And I remember I was screaming, and I puked. I couldn't handle the smell. It was terrible. Anyway, we were pushed to the front, and over there was a table, and they were giving you something to eat. Now, I don't know what it is in English. If any of you speak German, Gemüse. Huh? Gemüse is like a stew. Ochenweihe stew. All your life it should have been a stew. It wasn't a stew. Alwai, literally. Alwai. But they called it Gemüse. Now, it came in great big barrels like our dustbin ones, and it depended who was dishing up. Now, it was actually soup, And in the soup there was a turnip, Steckrübe. What's Steckrübe? What is Steckrübe in English? Cattle feed. That's what it is, Steckrübe. It was a piece of, well, I don't know how many pieces, but there was beetroot, which I won't eat to this day. You can kill me, I won't eat it. Turnip, I won't eat if you kill me. And maybe, if you were lucky, a potato. But it was hot. Now, the thing is, it depended who was dishing up. If it was the Czechs, the people from Czechoslovakia, and the Russians, they were fantastic. They were very, very, very nice. But the Poles were the worst. The Polish people in the camp, they were not Jews. They were from Warsaw. They were all educated people. And they, apart from hating the Germans, they hated us more. I remember one Polish woman, she used to see me and she used to ruffle my hair and all that. And she was very pleasant. And one day I'm in the barrack and she says, "Come, Irene." They called me Irene. In Dutch it was Irene, or Hungarian, Irene. My father called me Irenke, which means little Irene, because he had a sister who had passed away before the war, and I was named after her. Anyway, I was little Irene. So they called me in German Irene. Fine. She comes along, she ruffles my hair. That's okay. And then she says, "Come closer, come closer." I thought, what must I come closer for? You won't believe this. I was then 8 years old. I come up to her and she says, "Come close." And I'm standing right next to her like that. And she spat full in my face. And I said to her in German, "What are you doing?" She said, "Du bist ein," I don't know, something Jude. Verrückte Jude. I don't know what that is in English. A cursed Jew. Huh? Yeah, that's what she said. I mean, she was, that was the Polish people. Now, the Poles who were there were anti-German, but they hated the Jews more than the Germans. And to me, the Polish prisoners were much worse than any German. They were. It's a funny thing to say. I can only talk from personally. I never saw. Now, the guards in the camp were women guards. The women guards were very vicious. They were vicious. And everybody was kept together. We were together with the Hungarians, Jews, obviously. But we were all Hungarian Jews. When I say Hungarian Jews, they were Dutch people. All right, my mother was English, who had married Hungarians. So we were considered Hungarian, and you stood in a block. 5, 5, 5. You had to stand a certain way. And Hungarians were together. The Poles were together. There were more Poles than anybody else. And then there were French, and I don't remember all the nationalities. But there were 23 different nationalities in Ravensbrück. And it was the largest woman camp. Just Dutch courage I'm having here. Anyway. Nederland, ja, echt waar hoor, echt waar. Anyway, they were terrible. Now, they woke you up at 4 o'clock in the morning and it's bloody cold. I mean, I was lucky, I was little, I had a little jersey and a coat. To this day, I don't feel the cold like most people. I mean, I feel cold, but look, I'm nearly 90, let's face it, But still, people stood there shivering and they had to count everybody. And I think the women guards were not that good at counting. And if they said there was supposed to be 300 or 400 here, and there were only, 288 or something, then you stood. And you stood in that freezing cold in the German winter. And it used to be 10 to 20 below zero. I mean, I was okay. I had my little coat on. But my mother and all the other women had a little cotton dress, and they had clogs and a little cotton thing and a little doek. How can you keep warm? So everybody stood like this. A lot of people fainted from the cold. some people couldn't handle it. I personally saw people who threw themselves against the electric fence. It was the most horrible thing to see. And, of course, being a German concentration camp, God forbid they should take the body away. No, the body must stay there. That's to teach you not to try and escape. That's to teach you. They were always teaching you something. Anyway, the men guards, the German men guards, I won't say they were nice, but they weren't bad. But the women guards, the things I saw, well, I must just explain this. I was little, and anyway, the one woman guard, I think she was hung, whatever the word is. You're the English student, was it hanged or hung? Hey? Come on, Ronit, whatever. She was hanged for atrocities in Ravensbrück. Not many women were hanged, but she was. She had a little whip. It had a silver handle. And at the end of the silver handle were like leather thongs with something on it. And if you did anything, you could blink the wrong way, who knows? They hit you in the face. And you'd see people bleeding. And, of course, the women guards came with big dogs. Now, I personally, many years later, I had a Rottweiler. I love Rottweilers. They were not Rottweilers. They were German Shepherds and Bloodhounds. They walked in with these dogs. They were very warmly dressed. They wore their grey uniforms and their boots. I won't wear that colour grey to this day. I won't. You know, very nice boots. My daughter would appreciate boots. She loves boots. Anyway, and they were pretty awful. And to see people being whipped, and if people fell down because they were hungry or starving or freezing cold, and if you didn't get up straight away, what did they do? They put the bloody dogs on them, and these dogs were trained to go for the throat. Now, my mother didn't want me to see this. I mean, if it wasn't for my mother, I wouldn't be here today. And she took her hands and she put them over my eyes so I wouldn't see, and she put her thumbs in my ear so I wouldn't hear the screams. But you still do. And above all, I forgot to mention, I'll keep going backwards and forwards, apart from the smell of the barracks, there was a crematorium. And a crematorium, the smell of human flesh burning, I don't wish it on my worst enemy. And that smell was there all the time, and all the flames were going up from the crematorium. So there was that, and I say to my mother, what is it? And she turned her face, don't look, Irene, don't look. Or don't look. You knew it was there. And look, there were horrible things to see. But the men guards were not, the German men guards were not so bad as the women guards. And I found out afterwards by reading that the women guards they took, they weren't exactly educated people. They were very primitive, German people who, and this was a wonderful opportunity to be a guard, and they had lovely homes, and they had lots of food to eat, and they could do what the hell they liked, because who was going to stop them? Nobody was going to stop them. And nobody did stop them. But as I say, my mom helped me in many ways by covering my eyes and my ears, and she wouldn't tell me. I didn't know until after the war that they were burning people there in the crematorium. There were no gas chambers in Ravensbrück until the last 6 months of the war, because then there were so many people, how could they get rid of them? Now what they did was, there were always railway lines right nearby. And when the barracks got too full and there were too many people, the trains came and took the people to Auschwitz. And you never saw them again. I mean, we didn't know what Auschwitz was. Now there was one woman, a German block Altester. What's Altester in English, do you know?
The eldest of the block, the one in charge.
Altester, yeah. I've never known that. Yeah, a German lady. She was very nice. And for some reason, she was very nice to us. Now, I had never seen a fat person in my life, especially in a concentration camp. She was big-bosomed, a big woman. She had blonde hair in a bun, and on the top, very German, she plaited it, and she was a very nice-looking woman, a big woman. I don't know when she saw us or didn't see us, but anyway, one day she met my mother, and met my mother. I don't quite know what. Her name was Cathy Peters. And I can truly say that she saved our lives, because she called us in one day and she shows my mother a list, and it said Krausz, my maiden name was Krausz, which is Hungarian. Krausz Rachel, Krausz Donald, that's my brother, Krausz Irene, that's me. She said, you're on the list to go to Auschwitz. I'm not letting you go. I'll put somebody else's name on. We just looked at her. You know, you weren't supposed to look at them when they spoke to you. You had to stand with your head down. So you couldn't look at them. And she crossed off Krausz, I still remember, with a red pencil, and she put down the names of 3 innocent Jewish people. And they went to Auschwitz, and they're not here anymore. So she saved our lives. Another time, she called my mother in. Now, we never saw her hit anybody. She didn't. We never saw her abuse anyone. But she did have, if she didn't like you, she could just send you on a train. One-way trip to nowhere. One day she calls my mother in, and I'm hanging on to her for dear life, because my mother worked a 10-hour day. Everybody worked. So I didn't see her all day. And what did the children do? That's why I said to my daughter, when I die, I want it on my tombstone. I want to say that I flew away all my life. I mean, all my life. All the time I was there. And the other little girls, we wanted to grow wings and fly over the wall. We wanted to fly away. What would we, you had no toys, you had no nothing. So you made up stories. We were all princesses. We were all going to fly away. She calls my mother in, and she screamed, honestly, and I'm crying away. And my mother said, what did I do? What did I do? You won't believe what she said. She said to my mother, it's bad enough that you have a little girl who's in a concentration camp. Bad enough, yes, thank you, we knew that. But what's worse is that it's her birthday and nobody gave her a present. I mean, can you believe that? This is a woman who sent people to their deaths all the time. And she shouts at my mother because it was her birthday and nobody told her. Well, my mother was absolutely flabbergasted. And this woman opened the drawer. She had a beautiful office. And she opened the drawer. I won't forget this either. And I remember I had hair. And she took out a lovely green satin ribbon and she tied a big bow in my hair. She said, every child should have a birthday present, and this is your daughter's present. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Anyway, that was her. She was very good to us, I must say. And my brother was with us for a while, but then he went to the men's camp. And she was nice to my brother. When he was sick, he should have been sent. The hospital, if you can call it a hospital, was called a refia. And people went to the hospital and they had a very simple rule. If you were not better within 3 days, you got a lethal injection and then you went to the crematorium. No medicine, no antibiotic, nothing. So it wasn't a good place to be. Anyway, my brother got ill and he was sent to the refia, and my mother was very worried. And she said to my mother, I won't let anything happen to your brother. Why she liked my brother was she had a little brother in Germany who looked like my brother. Now, my brother's hair also wasn't shaved. He had curly hair, not blonde. He had brown hair, but thick curly hair. So that saved him. She let him stay in the hospital for 3 days until he got better. And afterwards, of course, he was sent to the men's camp, which he did survive. He had a very bad time, my brother. He's 95 now. Anyway, so she had her good points. Now, I also forgot to mention that with this horrible soup, when we got there, the people dishing up the soup, if it was Polish women doing the soup, now normally if people are starving, I forgot to mention, you got 1 slice of bread a day. And I found out afterwards the bread was 60%, what do you call it? Sawdust. It was 60% sawdust. So how nutritious was it? You got 1 slice and you got a cup of coffee, ersatz. I don't know what ersatz is, but it was actually made from coffee, from acorns. But it was hot. Huh? Fake coffee, ersatz, yeah. Okay. So you got but it was warm. So everybody held on to it, and 1 slice of bread. And occasionally you got a little bit like, not even a thumbnail full of margarine and a little drop of jam. Sundays people didn't work. They didn't have to go to work. I don't remember ever having meat, but apparently my mother said we did have meat. It was probably horse meat. I don't know. But nobody got fat on that meat. And as I say, if the Polish women were dishing up, instead of stirring the soup so you got a little bit of the vegetables that was sitting at the bottom, no, they gave it to you from the top. So you were getting hot water. But if the Czechs were fantastic, the Czechoslovakian women, a lot of them were a Michelin. I don't know what, you know what a Michelin is? A mixed race. You had a Jewish mother or a Christian father, but you weren't pure Jewish, and they were somehow above the ordinary Jews. And they had good positions in the camp, but they were nice people. And my mother was very friendly with the one, and she was also a school teacher, and my mother spoke to her in Yiddish, and she spoke to my mother in German, and they corresponded for many years after the war. But they were nice. And when I came and I was given this Gemüse and the smell, I was sick from it, I couldn't eat it. And I said to my mother in Dutch, I can't eat this. And suddenly the woman behind me grabs the soup, pours it into her cup and goes away. And I was left with nothing. Well, I wasn't going to drink it anyway. And then she said to my mother, now listen here, she said, there is no pantry here. There is no fridge. There's no cupboard where you can get a piece of chocolate, a piece of bread, a piece of fruit. This is what you get. You've got 1 piece of bread and this soup. I mean the coffee, the ersatz coffee. Nobody got lunch. And in the evening, you got something, the so-called Gemüse. So, of course, people dropped weight all the time. And she said, you tell your daughter, she better eat it. So of course, I'm performing away there, I'm not going to. Well, after 2 days of not eating, I was so bloody hungry, I would have eaten anything. So of course, I ate this ghastly stuff. But they were nice, the Czech people. And so were the Russians. The Russians, they were all there. The Russians and the Jews were treated, and the French, were treated very, very badly by the Germans. Now that camp, Ravensbrück, also had where they experimented like they did in Auschwitz, where they operated on people and they infected them, so they got gangrene and one thing and another, and they did pretty horrible things. And they had it in specially for the French. And, well, I remember there was one woman, not that I knew her, but where they tortured people, you could hear the screams. And I always said to my mother, why are they screaming? And she said, no, don't worry, don't worry. How are you going to explain to a child? Afterwards, I found out that one woman had the misfortune, her surname was Churchill. She was no relation to Churchill, but her surname was Churchill. I think her husband's grandfather's brother or something was related to Winston Churchill. and they thought she was related. And they wanted information, which she didn't have. So they pulled out her nails one by one. And I remember the screams. And when I went back to Germany a few years ago, I went back very often after the war. I mean, not straight after the war, like in the 70s and 80s. They had like commemoration for the people of Ravensbrück. And I went to the place and I saw where they did the tortures. It wasn't very nice. Anyway, that was just one of the things. Well, anyway, there's a lot more things, but I won't go into it. Anyway, my mother met a Chinese woman. In fact, my daughter is named after her. My daughter's name is Ronit because my husband wanted a Hebrew name. Ronit means joy to me. And this Chinese woman, I'd never seen a Chinese woman in my whole life. She came to Ravensbrück. She was living in Paris. Her father was a general he was a Chinese ambassador in France, and her mother came from South America somewhere. She came there because in France she had tried to hide British soldiers. So, I mean, you can't do that. So she was sent to the camp. And how she found my mother, I will never know. I mean, there were thousands of people in the barrack. And one day she was just there, and by some miracle, she spoke English. I mean, she spoke 6 languages. Not that I understood any of them, but she spoke English to my mother. And she always knew what was going on. And she said to my mother one day, you know, Heinrich Himmler had made a deal with Count Bernadotte of Sweden. He was the nephew of the King of Sweden. And they were going to take people out of the camps, not specifically Jews. Our camp only had 16% Jews. That's all, 16%. But as I say, people were being sent away all the time, but 16%. And who did he want to rescue? Not the Jews. He wanted the Norwegians and the Danes and the Dutch and the French. No Eastern Europeans. Now, we were considered Hungarian. We were Eastern Europeans, so we were persona non grata. So we wouldn't have been there. But she said, you've got to get your name on the list. I don't quite know how she knew all this. And my mother had to go and see a woman who was actually a double agent, a British agent. She was a war criminal, but she was in the camp as a double agent. And my mother spoke a beautiful English. She was, great love of poetry and knowledge of literature, which my daughter inherited. And my mother spoke to her. I was with my mother, and my mother said to me, don't open your mouth. And I couldn't speak English anyway. I just stood there, and I was hoping she wouldn't talk to me, because I could understand German then. And of course, I spoke Dutch to my mother. And she said, yes, they are taking some people out. Put your name on the list. And then, this is before the end of the war, and I will never forget the date. Not the 28th, the 29th of April. In fact, coming up now, it's 80 years since we were liberated. The 29th of April, I still can't believe it. The buses came, the Swedish Red Cross. They did a wonderful thing. The buses were like our Patka buses, they were green, but they painted them white, and they put a red cross on it, so that, don't forget, by now, the British, the Americans, and the Russians were bombing Berlin. And we were 100 kilometers from Berlin. We were in East Berlin. And, when we had our name on the list, 20 people, and there was a Gestapo standing by the door of the bus, and he had a list, and he could see the name, and he saw Krausz, ticked it off, go and sit down. We sat down. Now, my mother was friendly with a Polish lady, a Jewish lady, poor thing, and she was friendly with my mother. I didn't like her. She was always miserable, but anyway, that's just nothing. And you had to fill up one bus before there was another one. And there was one seat left on that bus. So she says to my mother, this woman, why don't you let your little girl sit in this bus, and then you and I will sit together in the bus behind it, because there were lots of buses. And my mother said, no, my little girl is not going to sit by herself. She's sitting with me. And you won't believe this. That bus was bombed and everybody on it was killed, including poor Mrs. Paul. And she wanted me to be on that bus. That's why when people say to me, Hashem spared you, he didn't spare me. It was luck. It was pure luck. Well, that was just that. But another thing I think I should mention. One day we're standing at Appel, which means roll call. And the commandant was a very big fan of Hitler. And as much as he loved Hitler, he hated the Jews. And one day he's there and he had a table and I'm standing next to my mother, of course. And in German he calls out, what is that Aryan child doing among the Jews? Who's the Aryan child? They thought it was me because I was blonde and blue-eyed. And I got a hell of a fright. And come around, come. So I was thought my mother would come with me, and the guard said, no, I've got to go on my own. And I go and see this ghastly man who was a war criminal. He was one of the few who was hanged or hung, whatever, by the Americans. And I go and stand in front of him, and he says, you're not a Jewish child. Why are you standing with these people? And he had instruments. Well, if Tali was here, she would know. He had a table, and he measured my forehead. He measured my nose. He measured the distance between my eyes. He measured my lips and the cheekbone. Oh, what else can you measure? And he said, this is definitely not a Jewish child. Jewish children, I don't know where he got it from. Low forehead, the eyes are close to the head. I haven't got a hooked nose. I haven't got thick lips. In other words, there was nothing Jewish about me. I had no right to be there. And this German guard who marched me up there said, yes, but she's a Jew. Look, she's wearing the thing here and there. And then she says, look at her hair. And she looks at my hair. And my hair was, anyway, it wasn't long, but it was like past my ears, like here. And she suddenly he sweeps my hair away. Oh, he says, you've got Jewish ears. What are Jewish ears? I've never heard of it. But and of course everybody laughed. Now, when you're little and thousands of people are laughing at you because of your ears, bless you. For years I had a complex and I always wore my hair long. I always covered my ears. And it was only like 30, 40 years after the war, I went to Canada to see one of my father's surviving brothers, who was my favorite uncle. And when I walked in, he hadn't seen me since I was little. He said, oh my God, Irene, you're still covering your ears. He remembered because his wife was in the camp. She wasn't his wife then, but she was in the camp and she told him the story. That was that. Then there was another thing. There was one guard who used to walk up and down, and when she saw me, she used to look at me, a German woman guard. The women guards were horrible. Stare at me and stare at me. She never said a word. And one day she comes up to my mother. Now, I didn't know this until long after the war, when I was already married with 4 children. She goes to my mother, and in German she says to her, I am going to take your child because she is an Aryan child, and I'm going to bring her up like a good German. She'll live in Berlin. She'll have all the advantages. We're talking 1945. She's going to bring me up as a good German. And my mother said, but you can't take her. She's my daughter. And she said, you're just a cursed Jew. You can do nothing. Well, what could my mother do? So she said to me, with the camp, where could you go? So she said, when you're in the barracks, don't go near the fence, don't go here, don't go there. You couldn't go outside the barracks anyway. In other words, make yourself invisible, if that was possible. And my mother was terrified that they could just come and take me. And one day went past, and 2 days went past, and we didn't see this woman. And my mother only told me this after the war, long after the war, when I was long married. And she said, this woman was coming to take you. And my mother didn't know when it would be. And then one of the other guards said to my mother, "Oh, you know that woman who liked your daughter? Don't worry, they've sent her to Auschwitz. She's not coming back here." That to me is luck. Luck. She could have taken me. God knows what would have happened. That's why I say a lot of it was luck. And then, of course, my mother was also a slave labourer in Siemens, because how did Siemens get so big? There were thousands and thousands and thousands of Siemens factories all over Germany, and who did they use? Slave labour. You didn't have to feed them, you didn't have to pay them. They paid the Germans from the camp a couple of Deutschmarks, whatever money they had, it was Deutschmarks. And this Chinese lady said to my mother, "If you have a chance to go to Siemens to work there, go, because however bad it is here, it's better there." And then lo and behold, one day they came looking for people. I don't know if they wanted educated people, but anyway, they asked me what my mother was, and she said she used to be a school teacher. And she had to put her hands on the table, and of course she was skinny, she had long, thin fingers. And they said, yes, she could go to Siemens. Now, children couldn't work in Siemens until you were 14, because they used children. But I wasn't 14, and I was very small. At the end of the war, they thought I was 6, and I was more than 6. Anyway, we walked. I remember there was my mother and me and the lady who became my aunt, and this Chinese lady as well. Without her, I wouldn't be here today. She was fantastic. And we walk, and it's a long walk. You know, if you're hungry and not well, I mean, people were dying, never mind gas chain, whatever the things, typhoid, TB, what do you call it, constant running stomach, what do you call it? You name it. You name it, they had it there. That's why I've said, I consider myself a healthy person, never mind I walk with a stick. But I mean, you know, if you didn't succumb to all those things that I never had any children's illnesses. I only had measles when I was a child in Holland before the war. The only thing I ever had. I never had, I don't know, all the other children's things, I don't know. But anyway, we get there, we walked for 4 kilometers, which is a long way, and then the barrack door opens and a German guard comes out with a big smile, and I'm right in the front because I couldn't walk as fast as the others. So my mother said, we must be in the front and you won't be left behind. So I'm walking between my mother and the lady who became my aunt. And she takes one look at me and she says to my mother, "Oh, that's your little girl." And my mother said, "Yes." And I think my mother cried. She wasn't used to anyone being kind. And she said, "I'm going to bring her a glass of milk." Now, I do not drink milk. I was allergic as a child for many, many years. And I'm not allergic anymore. You grow out of it, but I don't like milk. I don't have it in tea or coffee or anything. I don't even like the smell of it. And my mother burst into tears because she wasn't used to somebody being nice to her. Now, I wasn't supposed to be there. I was too young to work. So I must say it was clean. There were barracks. And where did I have to be? When I think of it now, I had to hide under the bed all the time so nobody would see me. And I was under the bed there for I don't know how many weeks. And you know, you dream your dreams. What do? No toys, no crayons, no pencils to draw with. You do your own thing. Anyway, then we came back to Ravensbrück, I don't remember when we came back, but we did come back. And then again, this Chinese lady told us about the buses that were coming to rescue people. And my mother got her name on the list from this English woman. And we were taken to Sweden. We were rescued by the Red Cross on the 29th of April. So to me, that is, now it will be 80 years since I was liberated. But meanwhile, I've been going back to Germany every 10 years because they have a commemoration. And this year is 80 years since the camp was liberated. And they've been sending me information. And I feel very bad that I can't go, but I've got a bad hip. I've damaged my knee. They won't operate. I'm too old. And anyway, and I couldn't take the plane ride. I'm very sorry I can't go because they were very nice there. And they keep saying to me, I've got to go because, I can't believe it, I am the youngest survivor, Jewish survivor of Ravensbrück, the youngest out of that camp of thousands of people. And she said that the mayor's going to be there, and you've got to be there, it's 80 years. I can't go. I'd like to go, but I can't go. So that's the 29th of April, which is imminent, is very special for me. So I like to celebrate, have a party here.
Can we ask you some questions?
Of course.
People have questions? Then I will ask you.
Irene, thank you. It was a riveting talk.
Who am I talking to?
Before your mum went off to work at Siemens, what did she do in the camp?
Well, my mother, I'm not very big, and my mother was smaller than me. I'm only 5'2". She was 5' nothing. She was a small person, and she was a teacher. She wasn't used to physical work, but that didn't worry them. She used to lay, what are they called on it? Those wooden things. Sorry? The wooden sleepers. Yeah, that's what she did. She had to carry them. And then she worked, I don't remember, after the war, there's a lot of things I don't remember. But she wouldn't tell me. And I'd say, Mom, what happened here? What happened there? She'd say, you don't remember, you're a lucky girl. I mean, I was already married with 4 children. And she said, I'm a lucky girl because I want to know what happened to me. To this day, I don't know half the things. And she didn't tell me how bad the conditions were when she worked in Siemens. She never, because it was, as far as I was concerned, okay, I hid under a bed all the time for 3-4 months. That's not so bad, worse things, I suppose. And she wouldn't tell me. But when I went to Germany about 7 or 8 years ago, I was invited by Siemens, because how many survivors are there from Siemens? And they were so unpleasant. And I haven't got the chutzpah that I've got today. That's all I can say. Now, I never go to Germany alone. I always take my son with me. My eldest son's a psychiatrist. And he's very calm and, like the first time we went to Ravensbrück on a visit, I was scared it sounds ridiculous. I mean, the gates were gone, the electric fences are gone, but the walls are still there. And there was a big gate, and you had to sort of literally step over to get into the camp. And I said to my son, I can't do it. What if they come and get me? That's always in your head. I mean, this is years after the war. And my son said to me, Mum, there's a gate, there's a gate, there's a gate, there's a gate. You can step over, nobody's going to get you, and I'm going to be with you all the time. Well, some things that was it. But as I say, we go back, and they were very nice to us. And then I go and get invited by Siemens. They wanted my memories of Siemens. Well, all I did was hide under the bed. I didn't see what they did. My mother made things for the, what's it called? The microphone, the aeroplane. What was it called? Some little thing for the aeroplane. No, like for the microphone. because she had long, thin fingers. Well, nobody had fat fingers, I promised you. But anyway, they wanted somebody with a certain amount of intelligence because you had to follow instructions. And that's what my mother did. And she never complained. But when I went, not the 5 years ago, a few years back, there was a German man there who was very, very nice. He wrote a book on Ravensbrück. And he said to me, "Do you know what work your mother did?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you know the conditions she worked under?" I said, "No." Well, I didn't know until then. I was quite horrified. They worked a 10-hour day. They got food, not a lot of food, but they got food, and the food was clean. And you sat at long tables, 10-hour day. You were given a half an hour for lunch, which isn't very much. And there were toilets, and you could go to the toilet and do whatever you had to do, and then you had to come back. But there were more people than there were toilets. So very often, if you stood in the queue, you couldn't always get to the toilet. So not a nice thing to talk about, but people used to soil themselves. And they had to sit in this muck because there wasn't a change of uniform. That was Siemens. But nobody was, when I say ill-treated, I mean they weren't beaten or anything like that. But there was one incident that was very bad. A young woman, a Belgian woman, was walking to Siemens. It was 4 kilometers to walk. And everybody was hungry. And on the left, there was like a place where pigs were running around. And on the right, I don't know, I never saw it, but somebody told me who was there. Oh, this man who wrote the book. And she saw these pigs, and what were they eating? What was it? Like mealies, you know. They were all, it was cattle food. And she was starving. So she saw it on the ground. I mean, the pigs had been eating it, and she saw it. And she took one piece of this ghastly mealie, whatever it was, and she was very hungry. She started to eat it. And the German guard saw her, and he said, "How dare you steal from my pigs?" And he pulled her by her hair, and he shot her there and then. And she lay on the floor dead for I don't know how many hours, until they took her away to be gassed. That was Siemens, lovely Siemens. They did terrible things. And when they invited me, God knows why, and they were asking me questions, but they were very aggressive. I was actually scared when they were there. I mean, it wasn't them. It was their grandfathers, obviously. And they said, "Oh, but conditions were better, and there were no gas chambers, and nobody beat you, and nobody this, and nobody that." I said, "Yes, but look at the conditions. There is no food." And this apparently was true. Siemens provided plenty of food for the prisoners, but the German guards stole the food, so the prisoners got very, very little. That's one of the things my mother did. And then in the camp it was manual work. Pushing things, pulling things. At one stage the commandant found out that she was a school teacher. "Oh," he says, "there are a lot of children here now. I want you," it was considered a cushy job, "go into the barrack and sit down with the children, and you can, you know, you're a school teacher, whatever." So my mother said, "Well, you know, she's got to teach them something." Don't forget they were speaking all different languages, these children. So my mother asked for paper and pencil. And this guy went berserk. "Do you think this is a holiday camp? Make up things. Well, how can you entertain children?" But my mother, she did. She told them stories. She translated stories. And she told the children stories. She had to do something with them. And another thing she did, which also helped her a lot, was when we were standing in the cold for hours and hours and hours, she used to recite poetry. Well, she only knew English poetry, obviously, but she knew all the classics, Keats and Byron, Wordsworth, everybody. And she used to say this poetry, and then she translated it Not that her Dutch was so good. She translated all these beautiful poems into Dutch, and it was to, even if they didn't understand it properly, she said she wanted to get their minds off the horrible things that were going around. And it made a difference because one of the young girls who only died recently, said to me she was so impressed with what my mother had told her about the poetry, that after the war, when she got married and had a daughter, she came from Holland. She said, well, she was Hungarian Dutch, you know. She sent her to university in Oxford or Cambridge, and she studied literature because of the love of literature that her mother got from our mother. So that was something.
Any other questions?
That was something.
I'd like to ask you, you speak such good English. When did you learn to speak as well as you do? And have you spoken English for many years?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I said, when did you learn to speak such
when?
good English?
When? I'll
When?
tell you when. Well, I spoke Dutch to my mother all the time. But after the war, we were in Sweden and we were repatriated. Well, you know, they considered we were stateless. But they said because my mother was married to a Hungarian, they wanted to send her back to Hungary. But we'd never been to Hungary. And my father left Hungary because of acute anti-Semitism. But she was born in England of English parents. Well, they came from Lithuania, but they, they naturalized British. And she said she wanted to go to England. And it was a problem. But my mother had a sister. And of course, she's talking Dutch to me all the time, and I understood German. That's all not a good German, but enough for when they scream and shout at you, you know what they're saying, you know. And but in Sweden, there was a Swedish lady who'd worked in Germany, and she taught me. I didn't know there were nice German songs, you know, and she taught me beautiful German songs. And instead of the marching songs that you always heard. And we eventually got to England, and my mom's sister wrote to Winston Churchill. And my mom's sister was not an important person. She just worked in the Home Office. And she wrote to say that her sister had gone through the war, lost her husband and nearly all the family, and wanted to get back to England. And she submitted my mother's birth certificate, English. My mother's marriage certificate, English. Her parents', naturalization, which was English. And then we went to England for 6 or 7 months, and I'm talking Dutch to my mother. I didn't want to learn English. And she was answering me in English. And I had to learn English. And then when I came to South Africa, now I'd never been to school because, you know, in Holland, we had to leave school because we were Jewish. Then there was the war. Now we go to England. My mother put me into school there and I was kicked out. Because, well, first of all, I didn't understand what was going on. But one thing I did know what it meant if somebody called you a bloody Jew. Okay, that's much I knew. And I'm in the school, and because I was very blonde, they were putting on a Christmas play. I didn't know what Christmas was or anything. And I came back and I said to my mom, oh, I'm going to be a fairy, you must make me a dress. My mother sewed very well. And she made me a dress, and I thought I was a fairy. So she put wings on the dress, and I pitched up at school, and the teacher was horrified. Well, why have you got wings on your dress? I said, I thought I was going to be a fairy. No, they decided, because I was so blonde, and in those days I had a very good singing voice, I had to be in a Christmas play. They wanted me to be the Virgin Mary. I was the only Jewish girl in the school. I had to be the Virgin Mary. I'm sure she was a Jew, but anyway. So my mom was very upset about this. And then this other girl, whoever she was jealous that she couldn't be. And when I was coming into school, she got me and she I don't know, she threw me on the ground. I wasn't very big. And she kept saying, "You bloody Jew, you bloody Jew." That I understood. And I went mad. And although I wasn't very big, I took her and I banged her head on the floor. And I would still be doing it if they hadn't stopped me. And they said to my mother that I had criminal tendencies and they kicked me out of school.
How long did you actually live in England?
Who's asking
Yeah,
me?
no, it's me.
Oh, sorry.
How long did you
I lived
actually live in England?
About 8 months.
And from England?
No, because we had to be naturalised British. My brother and I and my mother were naturalised British, and we came here in September 1946.
So you've been a very long time here in
I've
South
been here-
Africa.
No, but I lived in Rhodesia for 3 years, and I lived in Israel for a year
Right.
as well afterwards. But yeah, and then of course when I was here, and my mother was talking to me in English, and I'm answering her in Dutch, and I said, "I don't want to speak English," and she said, "You don't have to like it. But you're in an English-speaking country, you're going to have to learn English." And I had a thick Dutch accent, Dutch-German accent. So all the kids laugh at you, they tease you, which isn't very nice. But after 6 months or so, I spoke like everybody else.
Well, I think you're absolutely incredible. Really, I think that all of us here can only praise you, and the way you spoke was absolutely outstanding. And I think all of us have enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you very much. But just like to say one more thing, because I speak at schools and things, and my message is, do not hate. You cannot hate. Look what hate is what the Germans did to us. You don't have to like everybody, but at least accept their differences. And if we can accept people's differences, doesn't matter their colour or creed or gender or whatever, accept that you are different from me. I don't have to like you, but that's how you are. That's how I am. I don't have to hate you. Hate is not a word I use, because hate is what the Germans did to us, and I'm not prepared to go down that road. I'm not. Although I was happy when I saw Berlin burning, I must say, I was happy.
I don't need this. Can I just ask you a question?
Sure.
How do you see the relationship between the Jews in Holland and the naturalized people of Holland? How did they relate to the Jews?
What
No,
naturalized?
at the time of the war. I mean, some people say that the Dutch were very good to the Jews.
Some
I've
were.
heard from other people that they weren't so good.
No, they weren't so
wanted to
good.
say.
Well, look, I was a child. I never came across anybody who was unpleasant. And my father and mother had friends who were Jews, Catholics, all kinds of people. I never felt anti-Semitism in Holland. I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't feel it, but I know that a lot of people were betrayed. You know, the Germans, if you could betray a Jew, they gave you in Dutch guilder the equivalent of like 2 months' wages. It was a hell of a lot of money. And a lot of people betrayed people. They did. But a lot of people were very good.
Okay.
But I've always had a great love for Holland. And one of my sons says he can't understand it. What did Holland do for you? I don't care. I was born there. I liked the people. I loved the food. I still buy all the Dutch biscuits and things, or the chocolate. If anybody goes overseas, I always say, bring me, the Dutch speculaas and whatever. I had happy memories when I was in Holland. But I'm not a political person. I can't talk German otherwise.
Firstly, thank you for a most inspiring talk.
Thank you
It
for
really
listening.
was. But, there are so many people who go through things and get completely crushed by them. And you haven't been crushed. What has been the secret of being able to become the person you
One
have
thing
become?
only that my mother taught me. I mean, I still have memories, they'll sit here forever.
Yeah.
But you can't dwell on it. And I always have to have something to look forward to. I mean, even if it's the first thing in the morning, what's the first thing I do in the morning? I wake up, I'm in a retirement village now, but I've got a little garden. I go into the garden, I smell the flowers, and then my best, I have, no, not this, I have a cup of black coffee. First thing, so I have the flowers, I have a cup of black coffee, and then I go and shower. You've got to have something to look forward to, because she said, don't look back. It didn't mean I didn't have nightmares for 20 years. I had nightmares for 20 years. Because it doesn't really leave you, but you can't let it overtake you. Lots of people do, and I'm very sorry that they do.
So your mother was amazing.
My mother was amazing.
Did she have the same way? Was she also like that? Because it must have been really hard for her.
Did she have the same what?
The same way of looking forward and not looking back. Because it must have been
Yes,
very
she
hard
did.
for her.
Look, she was widowed very young. She was only 42 when she was widowed. And she had to bring up my brother and myself on her own. And, well, first of all, she wouldn't talk about the war. When I said to her, Mom, look, a lot of things I don't remember. I mean, I was only 9 when the war ended. And I said, Mom, how did we get from here to there or there to here? And she always said the same thing. You don't remember, you're a lucky girl. But it's not good to have big gaps in your memory. But I can't ask her now. Too late. She wouldn't talk about the war, but I didn't know. You know, afterwards, she lived with me for many years. And when she got older, and she worked till she was 84. But anyway, when she got older, she kept falling in one thing and another, and she landed up in our parents' home in Orchards, which was a lovely place. And when she couldn't walk anymore, I mean, she died, she was nearly 97. But we had an African lady who looked after her. I mean, she could still talk and all that, but she couldn't shower by herself, and she wasn't walking, so she was in a wheelchair. And so this lady helped her. She's a very nice lady. And she said to me, I didn't know, she said to me, you know, sometimes she was on night duty, and she said to me, you know, your mother wakes up screaming at night, and she says, don't let them take me back, don't let them take me back. Because in her mind it was there, but she wouldn't talk to me about it. But she did talk to some of my children. I've got 3 sons older than my daughter. And she did talk to them. I don't know if she spoke to you so much. But she wouldn't talk to me when I said, Mom, I mean, I was there. You don't remember, you lucky girl. Now, you can't let things overtake you. You've got to, you know, there's a quote by, I think it's worth repeating, Anna Frank's father, Otto Frank. And he said, I live with the past every day, but not in it. With it, but not in it. My place is in the future. And I think that is so true. You don't forget what happened, but you can't let it overtake you. Unfortunately, my brother, the past has overtaken him, and he's still in the camps. And he's 95 years old. It's terrible. It's overtaken him. Everyone reacts differently. Pardon? Sorry? Met een beetje water, alsjeblieft. Beetje water, ja. Nee, geen ijs. Nee, een beetje water.